Hello everyone, me again, and today I'm going to do a review on this one Roblox game I found about like a week or so ago that really caught my attention in both good and bad ways. And so I wanted to go do a video looking into it further and really breaking down my thoughts on this game. Simply first, what is it? Retro Defense is a tower defense game on Roblox that caught my attention about a week ago. It's produced by a man called Corey Games, who mainly develops it himself. Well, I'm sure, or at least I'm sure hope, that mostly everyone watching this video knows what a tower defense game is, and simply for the sake of those in the back who don't know, a tower defense game is a game where various enemies spawn in and go down a set path. And as they go down this path, you're allowed to place certain units, typically known as towers, in order to hinder or prevent them from reaching your base where, if enough enemies reach your base, you lose. And the win condition is typically defined by outlasting a certain number of waves of these enemies. And an important thing I want to get into is that this game is still in beta. This is not a final product, and this is at the end of the day being made by one guy. I want to highlight this because I want to make it apparent to everyone that everything I say here is not to knock the game nor its developer down, but as an investigation into the game and its design in good faith, to see where there is to enjoy about this game and where it fails just so it can be explored and what ways this game could be improved. I don't want to go into exploring every aspect of its game in terms of its game design, as most of its features are just typical of the genre, so I'm mainly going to look into dissecting the aspects of the game where it differs from what's standard for the genre. The first place I plan to look are the enemy unit types the player has to defend themselves against. I'll skim over the more basic types, like, the ones typically seen in the TD genre, like the fast but weak ones, or the slow but strong ones. But to go to the ones which make the game stand out, those are the shielder units, the stunner units, the camo units, and the semi-boss, mini-boss units. Shielders have a gimmick which makes it so that they have a secondary health bar on top of their already existing one that has to first be depleted before you can deplete their actual health. This makes it so units like these can never just be taken out with one attack, diversifying the gameplay as it would motivate the player to invest in units with faster attack speeds in order to deplete the shield, and then kill the enemy faster, as opposed to units who have high damage dealing attacks but low attack speed. Stunner units I like the most, since what they do is that whenever they are defeated, they stun any nearby towers for a couple of seconds, preventing them from attacking any enemy units until they are unstunned. This puts an emphasis on players on placing the towers carefully, making them make more use of the entire map by punishing players who cluster their defenses around a specific point in the map. Other than that, there are also camo units, units that can only be seen by towers that have the ability to detect camo. This puts much more emphasis on the player to go ahead and specialize their towers into camo detection in lieu of focusing on DPS, or for those who don't know, damage per second, so that they can make sure they can handle any camos that come their way. And last but not least are the mini bosses. I classify mini boss zombies as those who have a damage reduction feature on them, excluding the end of game boss, that is. They are essentially, ones that fall into any one of the previous categories listed, with the exception that they take less damage from all of your towers, which I feel deserves a special level of classification. Now, what is the point of discussing the enemies without discussing the towers? Towers in this game have very recently also been given the ability to have two possible paths of upgrading, where after a certain amount of upgrades, you can choose to upgrade them along a top path or bottom path, each with their own pros and cons. To quickly take you through all the towers currently in the game, as well as taking you through my thoughts on them, let me start off with the Recruit. The Recruit is a very balanced, all-rounder tower, a great starting tower the game gives you, with it only really falling off in viability at the endgame. Its top path gives you increased range as well as camo detection capabilities, while its bottom path greatly focuses on DPS and gives it an ability which boosts DPS for a short time. The Sharpshooter is a great damage dealer, not to mention how innately amazing it is because it gets camo detection no matter what cross path you go for. However, it gets outclassed by many of the other towers in the game due to the drawbacks of its costs, attack speed, and placement restrictions. In this game, there is a special variant of tower that can only be placed on elevated structures within a map. These units I'll call cliff units. The Sharpshooter is one of two cliff units currently in the game, and due to the restricted nature of where it can be placed, it handicaps its utility in game. Not that I'm against cliff units conceptually, but just to list how, due to both the current usefulness of the tower combined with the current usefulness of every other tower, most of which not having such a restriction, it finds itself massively outclassed by those other units. The top half of this unit, however, gives it massive damage per attack, as well as a gimmick which allows it to do double damage to any boss unit. A gimmick I do like and appreciate as it adds a nice layer of depth to this unit by giving it clear specialization. Bottom path allows it to attack much faster and gives it an ability to attack even faster. The bomber isn't a bad tower, but as it currently stands in the game, it is the worst. It deals splash damage while also having a modest range in DPS. The top path gives camo detection, and the bottom path has somewhat better DPS and applies a stun effect to enemy units, which at its maximum upgrade stuns them for about a couple of seconds. The reason I say this is that the worst tower by far, simply because another tower does everything this tower does, but so much better. There is another splash damage tower called the Paintballer that I'll get into shortly, but to only bring up the aspects of the tower essential to my point, the Paintballer's top half doesn't only give it camo detection, but at maximum upgrade can decamo enemy units, meaning that whenever it hits an enemy unit that is camo, it will no longer become camo. That and its bottom path applies a slow effect to enemy units it hits, making them move slower along the path. Functionally, the stun effect and the slow effect serve pretty much the same purpose. One stops an enemy unit for a few seconds, where shortly thereafter it resumes at normal speed, while the other slows an enemy unit, making them go across the path slower for a period of time. Both serve to make the enemy unit take longer to cross the path. Furthermore, you can only bring a certain amount of towers into a round at a time, so that makes it very important to manage your loadout properly before heading into a round to ensure you have everything you need to handle the round. So why would any player put a bomber in their loadout when there is another tower which can do everything the bomber does either equally as good or just outright better than the bomber? And while it can be argued that the bomber is cheaper, it isn't by any game-changing margin, and the paintballer provides the player with so much more for only a few thousands of dollars extra, which won't be that hard to come across by the mid to late game. These factors alone make it the worst tower in the game. The swordsman is by far the best tower in the game. It is a small range but high DPS tower that maintains its value all throughout the game and never falls off. Well, for one of its cross paths at least. The top path is the superior path by far. It grants a swordsman resistance against being stunned and gives the swordsman camo detection, and at max upgrade gives the ability to inflict a poison effect against any enemy unit, with this poison effect dealing about 2.5% of a unit's health and damage every second for 3 seconds. Meanwhile, all the top half gets is increased DPS and the ability to inflict a burn effect on enemy units which deals 20 damage per second applied, while I am unsure how long the effects last. The bottom path fails to be a worthwhile investment because sure, while it has more DPS on paper, it is unreliable due to its lack of stun protection. What good is a close-range high DPS tower when a second it inevitably attacks a stunner, it's rendered completely useless for 3 seconds as opposed to the top path that you can consistently rely to keep attacking without sacrificing too much DPS? Not to mention the added bonus of camo detection, and even beyond that, when comparing the maximum upgrades of both paths, more often than not it's the top path swordsman which does more damage thanks largely in part to the poison effect. By the endgame, units will have upwards of 650 health, 2000 health, and for the final boss, 40,000 health. 20 damage per second is a mere drop in the bucket in comparison to the value percentage based damage will do to tankier units. And all of this for near equivalent prices, as the price to max out top path and max out bottom path are extremely close to one another. So it's not even a matter of one being a budget option of upgrading these units, no, these two paths are meant to be parallels of one another. And on top of that even further, it's just heavily incentivized in the game to always go up the top path, because the top path, in order to buy it, to first spec into it, costs $1,400, as opposed to specking into the bottom path, costs $2,500. Come out the bonus of the top path giving you instant stun protection and camo detection, it massively proves itself to be the better investment early on to the game, and due to how cheap it is, it's the easier investment. The Paintballer is the best splash damage tower and overall just one of the best towers in the game, for reasons mainly touched on when I went to go discuss the Bomber. I say it's one of the best splash damage towers not because of its damage, but just the ways it supports every other tower on the map by what it can do to enemy units makes it an unparalleled support unit. As said before, top path gives camo detection and the ability to eventually decamo enemy units, while the bottom path does more damage and applies a slowed effect to enemy unit it hits. It's very affordable, very impactful, and overall very good. I like the way this tower is designed and I have no gripes against it. The Coder is a tower that does not attack enemy units, but instead generates more money for the player, where the more you invest into this unit, the more cash it would generate back for you in turn. However, with the current state of the game, which I will get into shortly, it simply isn't a viable investment as the game does not go on long enough for the coder to truly pay back what it costs in any marginal sense, and simply isn't worth the headache of managing. The top path pays out extremely well as it is the option that pays the most money. Meanwhile, the bottom path doesn't generate nearly as much money as the top path, but has the added bonuses of generating any health the player had lost during the course of the game, providing a 10% upgrade discount for any towers in its range. However, the bottom path is never worth the investment. To upgrade an initial coder to the max bottom path would just cost about $16,000. Obviously, anyone who buys into this path wouldn't be doing it for generating money, as it'd be much cheaper and efficient to just upgrade any coders to the top path, which generates so much more money, so it would be done solely for the discounts and health regen. However, due to how expensive the unit is, it can only be afforded by the late game. And all for such a minimal discount of 10%. On average, it costs about 15,000 to upgrade a tower to max. So that means all you can really save by putting them next to a bottom path coder is approximately like $1,500. You would have to max out like 10 units to make this investment into the bottom path coder worth it. However, if you just dedicated all the money you would have put into a bottom path coder to approximately 2 top path coders, you would have generated more value in 3 minutes. And regenerating health? For 15k to place on a bottom path coder, you could just use that 15k to place on several more units to ensure you never use any more health. There's no context in which investing into a bottom path coder is ever worth the investment, and I really wish that something could be done to help balance its usage to make it any more viable. The Mortar is a great splash damage tower. It deals great damage, but it's very niche due to its high price, placement restrictions, as it is another cliff unit. The second and last cliff unit in the game so far, and has a slow attack speed along with absolutely no camo detection. The top path deals great damage and also applies a burn effect as well, and the bottom path mortar makes the mortar attack faster and to attack in bursts. The mortar is a good unit just for the sheer DPS it could squeeze out combined with its splash damaging abilities, with its biggest downside was its lack of camo detection, making it imperative to put the paintballer in a player's loadout if they plan to use the mortar to any heavy capacity. The Barracks Tower is one of the best units in the game. It's a spawner unit that every so often spawns a unit to walk the path against enemy units, stopping whenever enemy units enter the range of friendly units and attacks the enemy units while the enemy units keep walking towards them. And these friendly units have their own amount of health, where if any enemy units walk into that friendly unit, the amount of health that friendly unit has is dealt as damage to these enemy units, where if the friendly unit runs out of health, the unit despawns. The top path barracks gives the units this building spawns camo detection, and they spawn typically better units than that of its bottom path counterparts. Meanwhile, the bottom path barracks spawns an extra AoE unit alongside its regular ones, and they spawn all their units much faster than that of their top path counterparts. No matter the pathing, it holds its own extremely well. The Heavy Gunner is the most expensive, but most DPS dealing, tower in the game. Its biggest downside, however, is that it's too expensive to really be viable. Its top path gains camo detection, but even then the camo detection is very expensive and very late into the upgrade pathing. The top path also makes it so that all the shots of the Heavy Gunner deal AoE damage, splash damage, while the bottom path only gains a massive increase in DPS, making it the highest DPS tower on paper. But all of these are very expensive, and the amount of investment it would require to field this unit in any effective manner cannot be sustained throughout the game, especially in regards to its lack of camo detection. The creator made this tower intentionally this way, however, citing their reasoning being how they intend to balance the Heavy Gunner for the later game modes they intend to eventually add to the game. I'll speak more on the game modes of the game very shortly, but I bring this to highlight my critiques of the Heavy Gunner, not under the lines that it is a bad tower, but that as of right now, it simply isn't a viable option for the game mode we currently have access to. And same goes for the coder. Speaking of game modes, there's currently only one, that being the easy game mode. Once again, the game is still in active development, so it doesn't have all the game modes it is completely intended to release with. However, one thing the creator has done to help add replayability to the game, even in its beta, is by adding modifiers. There are plenty of modifiers added to the game where you can add difficulty to the easy game mode in various ways, such as the enemy units go down faster to track, all upgrades are more expensive, you generate less money, stuff like that. And depending on the difficulty of the modifier, it can grant you increased rewards to varying degrees, The harder the modifier, the more rewarding it is upon completion, adding a nice layer of depth and replayability to the game while the creator still works on making the rest of it. Something I would do absolutely give them kudos for. Overall, I like this game, and I feel like it has a very strong foundation to work with. However, I feel like there are several areas that demand improvement for this game to go that extra mile in quality. The towers are all very unbalanced amongst themselves. As discussed prior, some towers can solo around all on their own without too much of an investment with energy or thinking, while some are completely rendered pointless to use in the game's current state, either by their innate design flaws or by being obsolete in comparison to much more effective units. While the tower types are interesting in themselves, I don't feel like the upgrade paths for said towers are really that interesting. 99% of towers have their upgrade paths that just boil down to top path gives camo detection, bottom path gives higher DPS. Not to imply that making a player choose between two varying paths, each with their own drawbacks, is bad, but overall the game is just heavily skewed to favor the usage of camo detecting towers. Not only is the DPS of camo towers fairly similar to comparison to their DPS focused bottom paths, but the game's most difficult enemies are camos. 9 out of 10 times if you lose a round, it would be more often due to a lack of camo detection than a lack of DPS. After all, what's the point of focusing on DPS heavily over camo detection when the toughest enemies in the game, excluding the final boss, will be an extremely slow enemy unit with 650 health, meanwhile the toughest enemy in easy mode is a 2k health unit that is in camo. A unit that's strong demands some heavy investment into camo detecting towers, and since the DPS difference between the bottom and top paths aren't that great, there's never a situation where you would want to focus on DPS without camo detection, as opposed to improving the DPS of your camo detection capabilities. Because what good is a unit that deals 150 DPS but only towards 75% of the enemy units, as opposed to one that deals 100 DPS to all units, especially since all the strong units, the units that you would need DPS for, are all camo. It's this heavy need for camo coverage that makes or breaks so many towers. Ranger, Paintballer, Barracks are all as amazing as they are due to their innate camo coverage capabilities, and in the Paintballer's case, the ability to decamo all units it hits, and why towers like Mortar and Bomber are chopped liver in comparison to them. And to that extent, I feel like there should be more depth to the already existing mechanics within the game to help bring about balance to the towers. Like to help balance out all the added on effects like poison, stunning, burning, but having certain units be immune to certain effects or more susceptible to them to add more ways the tower can interact with enemy units in a similar way the top path sniper does, where how it does more damage to boss units. Like, what if when a fire effect is applied, it burns away the damage reduction buffs of the mini boss enemies, or whenever a unit is stunned, it takes 1.25 times more damage from all towers? Because as it stands right now, several effects are practically identical to one another, or in some cases, just worse versions of other effects. Furthermore, I feel like another way to add depth to the towers and their upgrade paths is by adding more enemy unit variety. What if instead of just camo units, there was like a lead unit that only explosive or fire based attacks can be able to damage, and in doing so, allow much more interesting cross paths than the typical camo or DPS, as well as adding specialization to other towers or cross paths that are typically overlooked, allowing them roles now needed in tackling this new variant of enemy. And lastly, I would appreciate if the game would do more with the ability feature. Because out of the current 9 towers, only 2 have access to abilities, and both of those abilities just make the tower attack faster and do more damage. Maybe some already existing towers can be reworked and balanced through the addition of abilities, like instead of top path swordsman always doing poison damage, it would instead only gain the ability to apply the poison effect through the use of the ability for a short period of time. However, I've heard that a nerf is going to come out to the swordsman very soon, so hopefully that will address the overpowered state of the tower. But overall, at this point, all that can really be done is wait and trust in the developer to complete and balance their game. And to reiterate once again, I say none of this in bad faith. I just want to explore and share my thoughts about the game and its current state, in the hope someone can look at this and spur them to start a discussion surrounding it. And overall, that is the end of my review. There is a lot less stuttering and pausing in this one because I have finally started scripting my reviews. That's right, the script of this one was just about 4,000 words, for better and for worse. But I'm proud of the state it came out. And to say it now, my next review will also be about Snoop Game, which I will warn you might be slightly delayed due to the holidays, as you know, with Christmas and New Year's coming up, and also Three Kings. I celebrate that, so another thing to delay it. But overall, I plan to now look at Snoop Game and dissect my thoughts on that, especially following my GVH review, because I feel like there's a lot to take away from GVH, especially going forward for like LGBT like games or just visual novels in general. And comparing it against Snoot Game, almost the antithesis of GVH, there was a lot that can be interestingly gained out of it. But that's the end of this review. Thanks for watching, and this is Chromie Fang, heading out.